where you had the Fed chairman actively and other chairmen or regional presidents come out and say, we want to see more inflation. So these guys are going to print more money. So if things don't improve, do you think by 2012 that perhaps we see a third-party candidate for the presidency? In other words, somebody comes up and people lose confidence in both parties to actually turn this thing around and do what is capable of fixing the problem.
Yes, unless we have a candidate coming from one of the other two parties, like a Ron Paul. I'll tell you the ticket that I would like to see. People ask me, who would I vote for? And I'm a political atheist. I don't believe in this stuff, these parties. Ron Paul is the closest. To me, the dream ticket would be Judge Andrew Napolitano from Freedom Watch, Ron Paul, and a Ralph Nader. And I say Ralph Nader because I am concerned about the food I eat, the water I drink, and the air that I breathe. I'm not an imbecile. I know that I would never eat those eggs. What they recall, 500 million of them from that place in Iowa. What makes 500 million eggs? Yeah, I know what a good egg is. And I don't believe, by the way, in the FDA. They're just protecting the big guys. The FDA, the health inspectors, for example, the health inspectors in Oregon recently busted a 7-year-old kid selling lemonade. The FDA showed up at that Auschwitz Farms over there in Iowa, chicken coop concentration camps, and they didn't show up in a year. So I want to see a Ron Paul, a Judge Andrew Napolitano who protects our constitutional rights, and a Nader kind of person, just to keep the oligarchs away from the door. But I believe that a Ron Paul Napolitano ticket could actually win with the system that's already in place, or maybe a libertarian.
Will the real test come? I know Ron Paul's son Rand Paul is running, so if Rand Paul can get in, maybe there's hope that people see an independent like somebody like Rand would actually make a difference. Do you think that's going to be a key metric to watch?
I don't think so, because he's very different than the father, and by the time 2012 comes around, he's pretty much forgotten. One of the ways I made my name in the business in trend forecasting is back in the late 80s. I came out with my real first book, Trend Tracking. And in that, George Sr. was president, and I had written that a new third party would form by 1992. And for some strange reason, I mentioned Ross Perot as I was writing about this in, a couple of paragraphs following. And the same kind of climate exists now. Look at the Gallup poll, Jim. 58% of the people want a third party. The only reason we're really not having it is because Republican and Democratic mafia throughout the country are controlling the system so tightly that it's hard for a third way to break through. But I believe it can happen in 2010. But most importantly, as are now in 2010, people should not expect one bit of change of any significance to come from this election. It's more of the same. It's the Washington Wrestling Federation. They pretend that they go out in the ring and they're throwing each other on the mat with these phony moves, and then after it's all over, they're in the back room doing deals.
How long do you think it is, though, Gerald, before the international community, what is it, our deficit this year is going to be $1.3 trillion. They haven't even told us what the deficit's going to be next year. They're going to reserve that until after the elections are over, so that would tell me that the number's not going to look good. But how long do you think it is before foreigners basically say no more?
They're saying it now. They're saying it now at the price of gold. $1,375 an ounce. That's a critical mark, by the way, that has been trading over that mark. And because the next stop is 1,400 and beyond, there's a currency war going on. And you said earlier, Jim, in your career you never heard a Fed chairman do or say what Bernanke is saying. How about this one? If these words were spoken by a lunatic, you could expect them. But they were spoken by the Federal Reserve Chairman from Chicago, Charles Evans, in Boston a few days ago. he was saying that what has to happen, because there's a liquidity crisis. Now remember this, this is supposed to be a respectable person saying these words. People should save less. They should spend more. And they should invest in the markets.
The reason we're in the mess we are is because we spent and borrowed more.
Exactly. And then he tells them to go gamble in rigged games. This is lunacy. This is sick thinking. And that's what the Federal Reserve is. They're sick people. Look what they're doing. QE2. You know what? Save the kiddie talk for, the high school crowd or the kid that you're talking to in college. Quantitative easing. How about flooding the markets with digital money that's not worth the paper it's not printed on? And you're devaluing the dollar in front of our eyes. And as the Brazilian finance minister Montega said recently, a currency war is breaking out. They are sacrificing the American people by devaluing the dollar so the money junkies at Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, going down the line, the Merrill Lynch mob, the Bank of America, the Citigroup criminals, so they can continue to get their money fixed. This is insanity. And by the way, I am sick and tired of people telling me that Obama is a socialist. This is the merger of state and corporate powers. It's called fascism. Let's call a spade a spade. The country has been taken over by the banks. It was what the whole nation railed against during the 1800s, the fear that the central bankers would take over the nation. And now they've done it. Quantitative easing. How about you work longer, you work harder, you get less so they could get more? That's why the people are out in the streets in Europe. Austerity measures. Oh yeah, cut my benefits, cut my pension, and raise my taxes so I could bail out the guys that made bad bets on bonds. I mean, who made this one up?
Well, Gerald, I'm sure that there's enough different groups out here that we should be able to alienate them all. No, Jim, this is a time, that people really have to stand up and step forward. Because one of the things that we're writing about in this next Trends Journal is this nation, we're going through a dark age. And there's going to be a plague here. And we're writing about that. It's not the plague that it's in front of everybody's face, but they won't call it what it is. Once again, current events form future trends. We're number one. Yeah, we're number 49th in longevity. That's a big one. And those numbers are going to get much worse. And what we're saying, Jim, is that when you look back after the last Black Plague, a renaissance followed. And the good news is right across the front of our building, 45 feet long, 2 feet high, is a huge sign we put up on 10-10-10. The American Renaissance has begun. Something is dying that needs to die. A rebirth, a rejuvenation. The future is bleak at best. Let's go back to the past and cherry pick the greatness of this country, just like in the Renaissance, and bring that forward. So let these parties die, let the money junkies rot, and let's start anew. And if we go back to quality, and we stop making these laws that favor the bigs, this country could get back to where it was, and beyond. Well, Gerald, you never pull any punches. I mean, you tell it like you see it. If our listeners would like to follow the work that you guys do, and you have, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a new Trends Journal coming out here shortly, do you not?
The Trends Journal will be out by Friday or the week of the 18th.
Well, Gerald, if our listeners would like to follow your work, tell them how they can find out about the Trends Journal, if you would.
Trendsjournal.com. That's Trends Journal with a plural. Trendsjournal.com. And by the way, Jim, we know people are having difficult times, so we have a discount request form, and we try to make it available to everyone because the purpose of the Trends Journal, this is what I love the best, every day we get letters, from people saying how we empowered them, how we showed them a brighter future, and they've taken advantage of it. And that's what it's really all about.
Well, super. Well, listen, we've been speaking with Gerald Celente. He heads up the Trends Journal. You can find out more by going to trendsjournal.com. Gerald, thanks for coming on the program.
Hey, thank you, Jim.
You've been listening to the Financial Sense News Hour with Jim Puplava. The Financial Sense News Hour is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a solicitation or offer to purchase or sell securities. Responses to listener inquiries are based on the opinions of Jim Puplava and do not take into account listeners' suitability, objectives, or risk tolerances. You should always consult a qualified financial advisor before making investment decisions. Financial Sense will not be liable to anyone for financial losses resulting from companies profiled or information provided on this program. The Financial Sense News Hour was produced by Steve